Hi, my name is CJ Miller, and I will be performing this original oratory for the National Individual Events Tournament of Champions. On the first day of Christmas, my parents gave to me not a PlayStation 4 gaming console, even though it's what I asked for, but instead they gave me socks and a partridge in a pear tree. Now, on this fateful Christmas of 2013, my best friend not only got a new PlayStation 4, he got a brand new iPhone 5. And a flat screen TV. And a trip to Disney World. And I got socks. But this small problem of a child's jealousy parallels a large problem of a nation's inequality when it comes to education. For many children across America, they are watching their peers get expensive new tools and technology while they are left with old and breaking equipment. In America, we fund schools primarily through property taxes that leave the poor districts poor while the rich districts get richer. And these education disparities can go on for no longer. Schools relying on property taxes for funding are inherently unequal and need to restructure their funding. To explore this idea, on the first day of my oratory, we'll discover why we fund schools with property taxes. Then, on the second day of my oratory, we'll beg our parents to show us the hidden and blatant effects this has on society. And finally, on the third day of my oratory, we'll create next year's wish list for the better ways to fund our education system. Boy, I hope this doesn't go for 12 days. Now don't worry, I'm done singing. But on the first day of my oratory, let's discover why we fund schools with property taxes. Now, on September 7, 1787, America, as we know it, was born with the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. And with the Constitution came the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Amendment number 10 states that the powers not directly listed to the United States by the Constitution are reserved for the states. And from that moment on, education became the state's responsibility. The idea was that if states made these decisions, the education system would become more equal. However, that couldn't be further from the truth. According to the American Board for the Certification of Teacher Excellence, common schools, which emerged in the 18th century, taught students of all ages in one room with one teacher. However, students didn't attend these schools for free. Parents had to pay for their children to attend these schools, and if you couldn't afford it, you couldn't attend it, which is the definition of a private school. In America today, it's not much different. If someone can't afford the expensive property taxes in a school district, their child can't attend those schools, making it private education under the disguise of public education. So now you may be thinking, why not just send your child to a different school district? That way you don't have to pay the expensive property taxes, but can still give your child a great education. Now, that is a very forward-thinking idea. But it's one that has greatly cost mothers Kelly Williams-Ballard from Ohio and Tanya McDowell from Connecticut. Williams-Ballard was found guilty of using her father's address instead of her own to send her child to a different school. She was sentenced to 9 days in jail, 3 years of probation, 80 hours of community service, and was fined $30,000. Tanya McDowell was found guilty of sending her 6-year-old son to an elementary school in Norwalk, Connecticut, while she lived in Bridgeport, even though she was homeless. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for stealing an education. So to simply answer the question, why do we fund schools with property taxes? It's because that's what communities decided. But these decisions stem from favoring the wealthy, which is an outlook on education that immensely causes more harm than good. So now that we've discovered why we fund schools with property taxes, on the second day of my oratory, let's beg our parents to show us the hidden and blatant effects this has on society. Now, in 1954, the United States Supreme Court ruled that separate was unequal and that school segregation was unconstitutional in the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision. And from that moment on, school segregation ended, and everyone was given an equal opportunity to education regardless of race or ethnicity. I'm just kidding. It's actually quite the opposite. According to a 2019 report by the New York Times, more than half of the nation's children are in racially concentrated school districts where over 75% of students are either white or non-white. The report goes on to say that school districts serving predominantly students of color spend $23 billion less than school districts with mostly white students. Now, these two statistics coinciding is not coincidental. If more than half of the nation's children are in racially segregated school districts, it's safe to say that more than half of the nation's children are in racially segregated communities. And we don't have to look far to see this proven true. Where I live in Kansas City, there is the area known as the Truce Line. The Truce Line is the socioeconomic and racial divide of groups in Kansas City. According to NBC, those living on the east side of Truce Avenue make, on average, $20,000 less than those living on the west side. And according to a census report by the University of Missouri, Kansas City, the non-white population on the east side of Truce Avenue is over 70%, while the non-white population on the west side is under 20%. Now, despite the overwhelming evidence of racial and socioeconomic disparities in education, the state and national government have taken firm stances against these needed reforms. In fact, these disparities were taken all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1973, the case the Independent San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez began when Demetrio Rodriguez, whose sons attended a dilapidated elementary school in San Antonio, sued the state of Texas, arguing that the funding system was unconstitutional. He wanted the Supreme Court justices to use the same logic that they had in Brown versus Board, that every child is guaranteed an equal opportunity to education. But the justices disagreed. In a 5-4 decision, they ruled that there is no right to equal funding in education under the U.S. Constitution. But more recently, in 2018, we learned the story of Ziona Bryant and Trinity Hughes. Ziona and Trinity had been best friends since the age of 6 growing up in Charlottesville, Virginia. But because Ziona lived on the north side of the town, she went to a predominantly white elementary school, while Trinity, who lived on the south side, went to a predominantly black elementary school. When they reached high school, Ziona was admitted into the honors program and was able to complete a competitive application to prestigious universities. But although academically equal, Trinity was not admitted into the honors program and was even barred from taking advanced courses. Now, she did end up graduating, but with the non-competitive application, she was unable to apply for the prestigious universities that her best friend had. And we can see these problems in school districts across America. In my own district, I'm fortunate enough to be able to participate in choir. Through choir, I grow my abilities as a singer, a performer, and a person. But it doesn't end there. In my choir program, we are actively encouraged to pursue a private vocal coach. So not only am I able to utilize a highly funded choir program, I'm also able to utilize a private vocal coach to continue to grow my abilities in the arts. But for many students in my area, and indeed across America, not only can't they afford a private vocal coach, their school district can barely afford a choir program to grow their abilities in the arts simply because the surrounding communities can't afford it. So we didn't get what we wanted this year. But now on the third day of my oratory, let's create next year's wish list for the better ways to fund our education system. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. According to U.S. News & World Report, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Vermont are 3 of the top 4 K-12 education systems in America. And they have all found ways to fund their schools that don't rely on property taxes. In 1997, Vermont's Supreme Court ruled that its funding system was unconstitutional. Now the state makes it so that each district must pay the same amount of per pupil funding. The district will then pay extra money into a common pool, which will be redistributed into the poorer areas. In 1990, New Jersey's Supreme Court ruled that its funding system was unconstitutional. Now the state pays extra money into 31 of its poorest districts. Finally, Massachusetts, which is the #1 ranked K-12 education system in America, passed Chapter 70 into law. Chapter 70 sets the base amount of per pupil funding each district ought to be able to attain. The state will then estimate income from taxes, and it will then make up any difference in a lack of funding. These 3 leaders in K-12 education have all showed us better ways to fund our education systems. So what do? Well, for most of us, we need to advocate to our state and local representatives to make these changes on our level. But for those of us living in states like Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Vermont, we need to advocate to our national representatives to fix this problem on a national level, or at least introduce it. By doing these things, we not only can improve the lives of students today, we can improve the futures that they build for tomorrow. Our education system is supposed to uplift students, encourage growth, and give equal opportunity to all. So let's finally begin doing that so that each child can reach their dreams. So now that we've discovered why we fund schools with property taxes, begged our parents to show us the hidden and blatant effects this has on society, and created next year's wish list for the better ways to fund our education system, we can now give every child of every social and economic background happy holidays, a happy school year, and a partridge in a pear tree.